So there were many questions about functions, and the general feeling I get is that half of you who have experience programming know how functions work, and the other half who are just starting out with programming and are beginners are kind of confused because the book wasn't extremely clear. So I'm going to go over these major points here. What are functions, and specifically, defining what function calls are and function definitions. And then I'm going to talk about why we use them, how variables are treated in a function, what are arguments, and then I'm going to go over a square example where there's a program that draws a couple of squares using a function. And so first of all, what are functions, right? Well, functions are blocks of code that you can define to do a job, and you can call them later on, right? And so if you look at this very simple program here, you could see that I have this function called sum3. And the way this works is line 1 through 3 is a function definition, and then line 9 is the function call. And so let me put that here. You could say function call, and then up here we could say function definition. And so I'm going to go through this the way the interpreter would go through this. Okay, so we go ahead and hit run, and the interpreter looks at line number 1. It looks and sees the keyword def, which means a definition, and it knows that this is going to be a function definition. So everything indented after the def sum3 is a function definition, so it's going to ignore line 1, ignore line 2, ignore line 3. Right? We get to line 4, it's a blank line, which is ignored. We get to line 5, and it runs this. So line 5 is the first line that's actually run by the program, and it asks the user to enter in a number. The input gets taken in as a string, but we need to convert it into an int, and we do that for two other numbers, right? So altogether, we're taking in 3 numbers from the user, and then we get to line 8, which is ignored by the interpreter, and then we get to line 9. And line 9, we just have the name of the function with the parentheses. So the interpreter knows that this is a function call, right? And so what happens here is it says, okay, the function's name is sum3. Now I need to look for the definition for sum3. It starts up at the top and it finds it, right? Line number 1, that's the function definition, sum3. And so what happens here is we can see on line 9 that the first number that the user entered in is passed in as the first argument. The second number the user entered in is entered in as the second argument to sum3, and then the third number is passed as the third argument. And the way that I like to think about it is kind of like a football game, and here's the quarterback where we have the function call, and it is throwing num1, num2, and num3 as a football to the function definition sum3. So when we go from line 9 and it jumps up to line number 1, we have these arguments, and these arguments are different, right? The names are different. We have x, y, and z. However, the values are still the same, right? So x is going to be the value of num1, y is going to be the value of num2, and num3 is going to be the value that gets passed into sum3 as the z variable. And these are just temporary variables. Okay, they're not like going to be used throughout the program. And so when we get down here to line number 2, it takes the first, second, and third number the user enters in, adds them all up, puts it into this sum variable, and then we print out the sum. Let me go ahead and run that. I get my enter a number. I'm going to put 1, hit enter, 2, hit enter, 3, hit enter. And what should be my output? Well, it's going to add 1 plus 2 plus 3. That's 6. Sum is in 6. 6 is in sum. And then it prints out the sum is 6 and a period. So I'm going to hit OK. Sum is 6 and a period. All right. So that's like generally how it works. When we get here to the line 3 and it prints out sum is 6 period, it's the end of the function definition for sum3. So where does the program go from here? It jumps back down to line number 9 and continues, and after line 9 is the end of the program, so the program ends. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. First thing is, why do we use functions, right? Who cares? Well, everything that we're learning about, from loops to branches to variables, everything that you see in a program is absolutely necessary. All right. And so when we talk about these functions and why are we using them, we use them because they are, well, I wouldn't say they're absolutely necessary, but they're a better way to code. Okay. And so what we can see here is I'm going to go ahead and show you this program, line 1 through 9, rewritten, but rewritten without using a function definition. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And this here is the program rewritten without using the function definition, except I just commented out each line so that it wouldn't run, right? So what do we do here? We enter first number, enter second number, enter the third number, we add them up, and then we print, okay? And so if you could see what something that you might say is, hey, this program looks a lot more elegant, looks a lot simpler, right? Uses less lines of code than this one up here, right? And that's true. It does use less lines of code. However, can we imagine that we need to sum up three numbers and print out the sum of those three numbers maybe 100 times in our program, or maybe 1,000 times in our program? Right? You could see here that these two lines, which are two lines, is longer than this one line here, where I'm just calling the function. And so if I had to do these two lines of code 1,000 times in my program, using a function call would save me 1,000 lines of typing. Right? And that's one of the main reasons why we have functions, is so that we can have a block of code that will do a job multiple times in our program, and we can call it using a function call, repeating the same amount of code without having to rewrite it over and over, right? Another reason is also because when we have our program separated into functions, it's easier to debug because we know this function does this, this other function does that. And then if one part of our program's not working, we can narrow our search down to this one function. This one function is not working correctly. Instead of looking at, say, 100 lines of code and saying there's something in here that is not working and I'm not sure which line it is, right? If that 100 lines of code was divided up into functions that were each 30 lines of code long, or maybe 15 lines of code long, it's much more easier to solve that problem. So those are like the two main reasons why we use functions. And another thing that I want to talk about is how are variables treated in a function, right? So functions are kind of funny because the variables that you create inside of them only exist in the function definition. So this sum variable exists in this block of code right here, right? But it does not exist over here. And this x, y, and z as well, right? They exist and they can be used here in this block of code in the function definition, but they cannot be used outside of the function definition because they don't exist. And so one of the reasons why we have arguments, right? You might be thinking, why even use arguments? Why not you just use num, num2, and num3 up here? Well, the reason why is because um, well, in this case, it would work. However, soon we're going to be asked to start our programs using a main function. And the main function has no arguments, but it would look something like this. Okay, so it would look something like this, right? Where we have a main definition, a sum3 definition, and over here we just call main. So our program is actually one line long, right? It's just line number 12. So when we run this, it's going to look at line number 1, okay, function definition, I'm going to ignore that. Line 5, function definition, I'm going to ignore all of this, and then come down to line 11, blank line, come down to line 12, the only line in our program that can be executed, and it's going to run main. Right? So once it gets to line 12, it's going to jump up to line 5, and then do line 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. From line 10, it's going to jump up to line 1, do line 2, line 3, jump back down to line 10, and that's the end of our main function. So after line 10 is executed, it's going to jump down to line 12, and there's nothing after line 12, so it ends our program. So I'm not sure if you're there yet, but this is eventually where we're going to get to, where the book is going to ask you to write your programs using a main function. And if you open up any program, download a mod for Minecraft and you look at the program, you'll see that there's a main function, and you'll see that the main function is run, and that's how the whole program is started. Okay, so this is a common convention, and it's something that we're asked to use as we proceed forward in the book. And so coming back to my point is since these variables num1, num2, and num3 are created inside the main function, they only exist in the main function. So we could not like come up here and say sum is equal to num plus num2 plus num3. All right, we can't do that. And why not? Because these variables do not exist and it would give you an error. They only exist in the block of code that they were created in, which is right here. Right? So that brings us back to the problem, right? So what's the problem is I want to use a function to separate my code up into logical blocks that do a specific job. And so this specific job that I want to do here is to sum up three numbers. Right? However, how do I get those three numbers to sum 3 if these num1, num2, and num3 only exist in the main function? Well, that's why we have arguments. Right? And so we can pass arguments. You just put them inside of the parentheses, and we could very easily have just put values like this. Right? That would work as well. Right? And the value 4 would be sent in as the variable x in sum 3. The value 6 would be sent in as the value for variable y, and 7 for z. Okay, so we could do that, but we're going to be going ahead and doing this. And so that's how arguments work. And that's the reason why we have arguments, right? Is because in order to have these values available to be worked on in the sum3 function, you have to pass them in, right? Because these variables don't exist up in the function definition for sum3. Okay, so that's a very simple example here, and I hope that was clear. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at another example, right? So here, if you look, you might want to pause the video and just take a look at this. Make sure you understand it. What happens here? We have import turtle, right? That allows us to take a look and use a bunch of functions, to create a turtle and create a screen and all of that. So that's run. And then we get to line 3, and this is a function definition. So I'm going to go ahead and skip all of this from line 3 to line 6. Right? Then we get to line 7, blank line. Line 8 is creates our screen, it makes the background color light green, makes our turtle Alex, right? Gets our Alex to become to draw in a red color, and then we are here where we set x variable equal to 0, which is acting as kind of a counter, and then we have a for I equal 0 to 3, and then inside the for loop we are incrementing the x variable by 20. Right? So the first time through it's going to be 0 plus 20, so x is going to be equal to 20. Second time through it's going to be 20 plus 20, so x is going to be equal to 40, 60, 80, and then it's going to break. Right? So that's the way that this is going to behave. And so let me go ahead and run this. And so I'm going to put it down here, and you can see what it does is draws a set of 4 boxes that are increasing in size by 20. Right? Okay, so yeah, I mean, the main thing that I want to tell you is that when we get down here to the draw square function call, right? Let me drop this function call. We are passing it 2 arguments. We're passing it the turtle, and we're also passing it this x variable, which is, x is not um, a good variable name, right? Instead, we should probably call it length because we want our variable names to be descriptive. So I'll go ahead and do that. And so we get down here, we make our screen, we make our turtle, length is equal to 0. First time through our for loop, length is equal to 20, and we call draw square function, passing it the turtle, and also the length, which is 20. Right? So after line 17, it's going to jump up to line 3, and t is going to be equal to the Alex turtle. Right? And you could also very easily just call it Alex, and up here you can call it length, right? But I didn't. However, you could if that makes more sense to you, right? Just be sure that in your function definition, you're going to be using Alex here, and you're going to be using length here, right? Okay, so we run line 17, function call, jumps up to the draw square. We go into the for loop, and it goes forward 20 spaces, and then turns left, goes back into the for loop, moves forward 20 spaces, turns left, does that again, and does this 4 times, which we all know draws a square. Right? After the end of the for loop, it's the end of the definition for draw square, so it's going to come back down to line 17. And then after it finishes line 17, we are still in the for loop. So it's going to come back up to line 15, and I is going to change to 1. 1 is less than 4, that's true. So it's going to come inside to line 17. Length is going to be equal to 40. And we're going to call draw square again, this time drawing a a square of length 40, and it's going to come back here, right, once that's finished. And once it comes back here, we're going to come back up. I is going to equal to 2. 2 is less than 4. That is true. So it's going to come inside of the for loop, and it's going to run this again, drawing another a square of length 60. It's going to do it again, draw a square of length 80. Right? And so that's basically how functions work, and that's what we're going to be using from here on out. Right? Again, like I said, a couple chapters down, I'm not sure if you're there yet, but it's going to start to ask you to use a main function. Right? So all of this should be inside of a main function, and you call the main function down here as the only line of code that's executed. Whoa, that's not a function. That's not in a function definition, right? So if we go ahead and run this, it's going to go ahead and import turtle, ignore the function definitions, get down to line 20, run the main function, come up to line 8, do this, right? Get down to line 18, jump up to line 3, come back down here, run back through the for loop, and draw square 4 times, and then end our program. So I hope that was clear, and I hope that cleared up any questions you have. If you have any other concerns, or you still aren't completely clear on this, then we could do a one-on-one, and I could talk to you about this on the board. So just let me know.